A very good morning to you from the wonderful island of Curacao. I would like to welcome you today to our fourth day of the EU Funds Week hosted by the Ministry of Economic Development. Special nod to the Team EU desk here at the Ministry for having facilitated this. My name is Guido Royer Jr. I'm the advisor to the Minister of Economic Development, and it's my great pleasure to have you here today in this session, session that's very close to my heart, which is culture and creativity. And our speaker today is Mr. Albert Meyer. He is the advisor at the Creative Europe desk in Netherlands, which is hosted by the DutchCulture. He helps cultural organizations based in the Netherlands, including the Caribbean part of the kingdom, to apply for creative European funding and to do fantastic stuff abroad. He holds a Master of Arts in Musicology and a Master of Arts in European Studies. And he is definitely someone that can teach us and help us with a thing or two with regards to applying for European funding. Yeah, I'm just a moderator, so I would like to give all the space to our speakers so that all of us can get the opportunity to learn about EU funding for this specific branch, and so that we can put our country on the map. With you, Mr. Albert Meyer.
Thank you, Guido. Hello, everybody. My name is Albert Meyer. I am an advisor for Creative Europe, specifically for the Culture subprogram. I will try to share my screen with you now. I see some of you have been in the session before this on the media part of the program. We had some difficulties with our internet here in Amsterdam. So I hope we will get through this without a glitch, but I can't promise it. I'll do my best. So Creative Europe. Creative Europe is the European Commission program for the cultural and creative sectors. It's a 7-year program, and it's open to the EU and some other countries. I will specialize a little bit later which countries exactly. The program is there to safeguard, develop, and promote European cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and heritage, and to increase its competitiveness. There are 3 sub-programs. This session this morning was on media, so that's actually the biggest part of Creative Europe is for the audiovisual sector, so movies, television, games. I won't go too much into that because we just had the session. I'm going to focus on the culture part of Creative Europe, which is really the funding for everything except audiovisual initiatives. So it's for all the cultural and creative sectors, and that's actually defined quite broadly. And it focuses really on the cooperation at the European and international level. The 3rd sub-program is called the cross-sectoral program. There are not too many calls within this cross-sectoral strand, but there is a thing called Innovation Lab, which is for projects focusing on digitization, and that kind of cross the culture and media strands. And there are a few calls within the journalism sector. If you're interested in the journalism sector, feel free to contact me at a later point. I won't focus on it today. It's a relatively new development as well, but it's an interesting development nevertheless. The Creative Europe program has a budget of 2.44 billion euros over 7 years. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But if you look at the European budget as a whole, it's actually a relatively small program. But we have seen an increase in funding for Creative Europe. In the last 7-year program, we had a billion euros less. As I said, most of that money goes to the media sub-program. About a third goes to the culture sub-program. As a side note, I don't think I can see your questions right now in the chat. But if you do have any questions, post them in the chat. The last 10-15 minutes of this session will be dedicated to the questions. Oh yeah, and to give you an idea, this year is the first year of this new program. We just had a few calls that were closed, and it was about 300 million euro available within this year. Next year, it will be slightly more, 30% more across all of the sub-programs of Creative Europe. Who participates in this program? This map will be updated. This is the map of the old program. We had 41 participating countries in Europe in the old program. The UK left definitely, is not coming back anytime soon, so I already omitted that one. What we know now is that all the EU member states will be in it. 3 actually of the European region countries are in. So Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein will join us. Probably the candidate countries will be part of it, mostly in the Western Balkans, and 5 EU neighborhood countries, so a country like Tunisia or Ukraine. This is a map of geographical Europe, but actually the map could be a bit bigger because the OCTs and ORs are part of this program as well. And those are a bit European terms, European policy terms. OCTs means the overseas countries and territories. So in the case of the Netherlands, it's the Caribbean part of the kingdom. So it's the 6 islands, Aruba, Bonaire, Curaçao, Sint-Eustatius, Sint Maarten, and Saba, that can participate in this program. As the last program ended last year, it looks a lot like the current program. We decided to kind of see where the funding actually went, and I made a bit of a research on where in the Netherlands and where in the Kingdom of the Netherlands the projects were funded, and we saw that in the Caribbean part of the kingdom, no projects were funded. Of course, in the Netherlands, there are other regions such as Flevoland and Drenthe and Zeeland that have not seen any projects. It is a bit striking that the Caribbean part has not been able to profit so much from this program. The Commission is also aware of this, so they've seen for a while that there are hardly any applications coming even from the Caribbean part of the kingdom, which is why they introduced a pilot program called Archipel.eu. I will discuss it in a bit broader sense later in this presentation as well. But we're very grateful that as part of this EU funding week, we get to at least talk about the program and hope to, in the long run, see some more applications coming in from the Caribbean part. As I said, this program was launched this year in 2021. Actually, only this summer, in the beginning of summer, the first calls were launched. And with this program, we see that it's not so much different from the old program. It still focuses mainly on international cooperation. There are a few cross-cutting issues. Those are issues that the Commission sees as important. And so within any EU funding program, you will kind of find these themes again. So it's the European Green Deal, it's inclusion, diversity, and gender equality. And specifically for the culture and creative sector, the new European Bauhaus has become quite a key word. So the Green Deal, if you don't know what that means, is a plan to make Europe a lot more sustainable. The new European Bauhaus is really a kind of an overarching idea of what we want Europe to look like in the future. So it's kind of a bottom-up approach to making Europe more sustainable, more inclusive, and to imagine a new future for Europe. For culture, the goals within Creative Europe, the culture strand, the goals are to enhance cooperation. That's the main thing. So it's not necessarily a program that focuses on production. Media does focus partly on production. But within culture, a creative product can only be supportive if it's kind of part of a larger international corporation. It is there also to strengthen the economic, social, and external dimensions of the cultural and creative sector. It focuses on innovation and mobility. So that's kind of what the program really wants to do, to strengthen, to professionalize, and to internationalize the cultural and creative sectors. There are a few priorities mentioned within culture. I won't go too deep into these. But you can kind of see that indeed it's not so focused on the production of content, but more on overarching priorities. Within the culture part of Creative Europe, there are 5 strands. So there's 5, let's say 5 calls organizations can apply to. It's cooperation projects, networks, platforms, the circulation of European literary works, and something called the pan-European cultural entities. I will go through these calls. They're not all as important. I mean, they're all partly important, but the main funding goes to cooperation projects, so I'll focus mostly on that. Networks and platforms have had their deadline in September and won't open again until in 3 years. But they can still be kind of quite useful as well for the Caribbean sector, I think. The pan-European cultural entities, I will skip. It's a new, very small strand, specifically right now focused on youth orchestras. So it's a very specific strand. If you're interested in this, please contact me if you're working with a youth orchestra. It's so specific that for this presentation, it doesn't make sense to delve too much into it. Okay, let's start with the European Cooperation Project. So that's kind of the main thing that we're talking about today when we talk about Creative Europe culture. The cooperation projects are there to promote transnational creation and circulation of artists and cultural content and innovation of the sector. It includes the following priorities that I listed here: audience and audience development. So how do we get new audiences to our work? Social inclusion, how do we diversify our audiences? How do we diversify our artists? How can we become truly inclusive as a cultural sector? Sustainability is very important. Of course, how can we make our sector sustainable? New technology is important. How, especially now within COVID, how do we incorporate digitization within the cultural sector? The international dimension stays important, and then there are a few sector-specific priorities. This is quite new in the program. That there are in the old program, all the calls were open for all of the sectors. Now the Commission has said for 4 sectors, namely music, literature, architecture, and the 4th I am missing right now. But they formalized a few specific priorities. For 2022, 2 new sectors will be added to this as well. But we'll have to wait and see for the new calls what those priorities will be. What can you actually finance? It kind of depends on the scale of the project. So for a small scale project, you can apply for maximum 200,000 euros. But this is a co-financing. So 20% on top of that, the partners that are organizing this should co-finance themselves. And there should be at least 3 partners from 3 different participating countries. So if you as a Caribbean organization are applying for this funding, you will need to find 2 other partners in 2 other countries, and they can be the Netherlands, because as part of the this program, the Dutch OCTs are counted as being part of the Netherlands. So you would have to find partners, let's say in Austria and Latvia, to run a project. For medium-scale projects, you need at least 5 partners from 5 different countries, but you can apply for a maximum €1 million with a co-financing rate that's a bit lower, 70%. So you'd have to add 30%. And for large-scale projects, you need 10 partners from 10 different countries. You can apply to €2 million with a co-financing rate of 60%. So you'd have to add 40% yourself. These projects have a maximum running time of 48 months, so 4 years. There's not really a minimum amount that a project should last, but we see in practice that it's usually around 1.5 to 2 years as a minimum to really have a steady cooperation project. The deadline was in September. There will be a second deadline probably in spring, but we haven't had any confirmation on this yet. If you want to stay posted, we have a newsletter. I will put it at the end of the slides. There you can follow when the new deadlines are coming. And in total, there's about 61 million euros available. I think next year it will be a little bit more that you can that will fund all of the projects. Give you an example of a European, because I'm talking about a lot about figures. What does it actually mean to have a cooperation project? As I said, we didn't see any successful applications from the Caribbean, but I did find a project that included a Caribbean artist within the cooperation project. And this project was called Other Words, the literary circuit for small and minority languages. And so this is an example of what they're kind of looking for in a project. There were 5 partners from Spain, the Netherlands, Macedonia, Slovenia, and Ireland that all work with small languages or minority languages. So the main partner, for instance, was based in the Basque country, and it's a minority language in Spain. And they saw a need for more European support for authors, writers that were not writing in a national language, but in a small language. So the Dutch partner was a Frisian organization, a Frisian literary organization. And so the idea was to select writers from these areas, from these languages, that then would be translated into the other languages that were taking part and into English. Actually, the Spanish partner said we should also include the small languages from the OCTs. So they asked Elvira Bonifacio, who's a writer from Curaçao, who is writing in Papiaments, to be included in the project. And so as part of the project, she went to Ireland to learn more about the Irish language, Gaelic, and then to write in Papiaments about her experience, and to write a piece in Papiaments as well that was then translated into all of the projects. And now this is an example from the literature field. I could give you a lot more other examples. We don't have the time for it today. If you're not sure if your idea kind of fits within this, feel free to contact me, and we can. That's usually what happens. An organization comes to me, and we kind of look together if an idea fits to Creative Europe or not, because it is actually quite broad. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet so much is that applications are usually done by organizations and not necessarily individuals. So we'll get into that, the possibility for individual makers as well. But for most of these strands, you should be a part of an organization that is doing the application. The second strand that I wanted to highlight is European networks. European networks are kind of organized per discipline. So I took a few of these networks as an example. So there's Europa Nostra, which is a network for cultural heritage. There's the European Music Council, that is specifically a network for music organizations. There's the European Festivals Association. IETM is a network for performing arts, contemporary performing arts. And they often also include members from, not per se from Europe. Sometimes there are actually international networks. But I think they are also looking for members that are underrepresented in their network. For IETM, I know there are no members from the Caribbean, but I think they would be open to have members. And then Action Europe is a specific network. It's not based on one discipline, but it's the European lobby organization for the cultural and creative sectors. So they actually do quite interesting work kind of to stabilize the and lobby for the European cultural and creative sectors. Next deadline for European networks will only be in 3 years, but also these are already quite settled organizations. If you are an internationally operating network, feel free to contact me. But it kind of needs to fit the mold to be able to apply for the network funding. The same actually goes for European platforms. That's the third strand that I wanted to highlight. It kind of works similarly to networks, but instead of being a connector, it's more of a platform for new talent. I won't go too deep into this, but within the Netherlands, there are 2 European platforms that are funded at the moment. They reapplied in September, but we don't know exactly yet when the outcome will be. But the festival Eurosonic Noorderslag runs a project called ATEP, which is a platform for pop music. So for young bands that are ready to internationalize their career, they get to play at Eurosonic, and the ATEP is a cooperation between Eurosonic and quite a lot of festivals around the world that have said, okay, we will book a certain amount of European talent that will then be booked by these festivals, really to strengthen the international careers of upcoming artists. Futures is a similar platform, but for it's a bit smaller, but for the photography sector. I'm not sure if in the Caribbean islands there is an organization that is has the ambition to become such a platform. Most of these platforms and networks actually are based in Brussels. They are really bigger international organizations. But as well with platforms, it might be interesting to know about it if you know of upcoming artists from the Caribbean that can take place in these platforms. I think that's a good way to engage with such a part of Creative Europe. Then the fourth thing that I want to talk about was the circulation of European literary work. So there's a small a part of the program that funds the translation and dissemination of European fiction writing. This has to be in an official language of an EU or of a participating country. For the Netherlands, that can be Dutch, it can be Frisian, it can be Papiaments, and I think if you're based in Aruba, it can even be English. But then it has to be the dissemination has to be international. So you can't just translate a book from Dutch into Papiaments, for instance, unless there is really a connection with Belgium. So if you're interested in this, if you're from the book sector, I guess it's good also to contact me and see if something is possible within this strand. Finally, there are some prizes and initiatives within Creative Europe. So there is actually this week we had the European Union Prize for Literature. There was a Dutch author called Gerda Blees who won one of the prizes for literature. And there are other prizes such as the Europa Nostra Award for Heritage, the Young Talent Architecture Award for Architecture, the Music Moves Europe Talent Award for music. So some of the disciplines have a specific prize, also to kind of support the European cultural and creative sector. And one thing that is quite well known is the Cultural Capital program. So in 2018, in the Netherlands, we had Leeuwarden, which was the cultural capital of Europe for a year. Then one thing that I wanted to, so what I've been talking about now, these are kind of the official ways of applying for Creative Europe funding. But something that is quite interesting, and I think especially interesting for the Caribbean, is that there are sometimes pilot projects. One of them was already mentioned also within the EU Funding Week on Tuesday. There was a dedicated session on archipel.eu. If you go, by the way, if you go to the URL archipel.eu, you won't find anything. So I included the link here. It's program archipel.eu. And as I said earlier in this presentation, it's a bit of a reaction of the European Commission to this, when they saw that there were hardly any applications coming in from the OCTs and the ORs. The ORs are the outermost regions for Creative Europe funding. And they want to know why that is, and they also want to encourage funding applications from the OCTs. That's why they launched a pilot project called archipel.eu. They only launched it, I think, last month. So for me, it's also completely new. But there are now 3 calls for projects. One for the promotion of intangible cultural heritage, one for a mobility fund. So if an artist from the islands wants to go to another one of the OCTs or wants to go to the EU, they can apply for mobility funding through archipel.eu. And then there's the collection. And so the collection is a bit of a showcase of what is happening already in the OCT. So if you have an interest, what you think is an interesting cultural product that you want to share with the rest of the EU and you want to garner some interest there, you can apply to be part of the collection. Now, we as a Creative Europe desk, we don't manage this pilot project. So you can ask me questions, but my knowledge of this is quite limited. We didn't receive training, for instance, on this. But if you want to have more information, I know who to contact you to. If you're looking for partners, I'm also very happy to help. There are some other pilot projects that have been of interest lately. A big one is called Hypertunis. This pilot project just ended, but I'm presenting it anyway because there will be a continuation next year. So Hypertunis was an international mobility program. So like within archipel.eu, you can apply for a mobility fund. You can do the same through Hypertunis. We'll have to wait until the new program is published to see what the difference is, if there is going to be a difference between this mobility fund and Hypertunis. But in principle, this is also open for artists based in the Caribbean and based in the cities. And this is indeed focused on, so the normal strands are really for organizations, for kind of long-term cooperation, and Hypertunis is really about, I'm an artist or I'm a cultural professional. I want to go abroad for research. Maybe I want to show my work there, but I don't have the funding to pay the ticket, to pay a hotel, etc. That's where this program is focusing on. So I hope we will know a little bit more soon about the follow-up on Hypertunis. Then there are projects called pilot projects specifically for certain sectors. So we had Music Moves Europe as well. That pilot project ended, but we'll have a continuation next year that I still don't have all the information on, that has specific calls for the music sector. Perform Europe, similar pilot project, but then for the performing arts, so dance, theater, circus. And then I mentioned European Bauhaus before. Now, sometimes also for me, a new pilot project pops up and I don't know where it comes from. Often this is funded by outside of the cultural budget. So we'll have to wait and see if new pilot projects will be added to this list. As I said, Creative Europe is quite a small, if you look at a European scale, a very small program. This EU Funding Week has been all about different EU funds, Erasmus Plus, and often these EU funds also have some opportunities for the culture and creative sectors. So Erasmus Plus might focus a culture project if it's really focused on development of a certain group. There are Horizon Europe funding, but that's for really big kind of research type projects, but they can also be interesting for the cultural sector. And so there are a few other alternatives. Again, if you're not sure where your project might fit in, it's always best to just send me an email, and then I'm very happy to think with you if a project would fit to any of these programs. Sometimes I don't have all the ins and outs of each program because I work for Creative Europe, but I'm happy to help. That's the end of my presentation. Here you can find my email address. It's culture@creativeeuropedesk.nl. I work with 3 advisors on media at the moment and 2 advisors for culture. So if you have any questions, you can contact us there. And I think I'm now open for questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Albert. I'm actually amazed by how much is possible, and how, because for us, every time we see euros, you know, the conversion rate is very favorable for us. So it is interesting. I see, I've been sharing a few of these links already with some friends that I know that are in the industry. So thank you for that. Let me go quickly to the first question that I already have in the chat. I would like to encourage everyone, any and all, to pose your questions. This is your chance. This is your opportunity to ask the person that really deals with these things on a day-to-day basis. This question comes from Kenneth Houghton. He asked, would this qualify for funding, digitizing our neighborhood culture, recording historical dignities, including the influences of emigrated cultures from India, China, Portugal, Germany, Poland, Israel, etc., etc., etc.
Yes, I see the question. Well, if something qualifies or not for funding I mean, it's an important question. Something I forgot to say, that this is actually quite a competitive program. So for cooperation projects, we see a success rate of around 20% of applications that in the end will be accepted. And it's really, I also didn't say that, but it's quite a harsh process to apply for EU funding. That's for Creative Europe, but I think for any EU funding, it takes a lot of time to write a good application. If this specific project would fit, or maybe it's good to kind of share the overall thought process to see if a project fits or not. The priorities that I mentioned within the cooperation projects, I think those are the most leading question. So the European Commission wants to tackle, let's say, inclusion, wants to tackle sustainability, and is looking for projects that kind of fulfill that. So a project on digitizing neighborhood culture, it could qualify if it follows these priorities, but it would have to not only focus on the neighborhood that Kenneth is talking about, but would be based in at least 3 different countries. There should be an exchange of some sort, and there has to be some sort of European impact of that as well. Kenneth, you're very welcome to email me to discuss this specific point further as well.
Yes, the following question is from Ms. Lida Pant. Hi, Lida, how are you doing? Nice to see you. When will the new calls open again? And are the voorwaarden the same for next year?
Yes. So the new calls, we're still waiting for the publication of the new calls. So hopefully, and we usually don't know until the day that they are published, when the calls are published. We have an expectation that they are published in autumn, which is now. So it could really be any day now that these calls will be open. The voorwaarden, so the prerequisites for applying will look a lot like the calls that were open in the first round, but there will be we expect a few changes within, especially the cooperation strand. Will now focus on two more priority sectors, but overall it will look a lot like the first. The first call, yeah. And so when I say the calls will be opened soon, if that happens, then the deadlines will most likely be in spring. But we are still waiting for confirmation on this.
Thank you, Albert. The next question comes from Monique Rosalina van der Kuilen. What can you do as an individual? You mentioned to talk about this.
Yeah. So what I was talking about when I was talking about the individual was Archipel, which offers this mobility funding within the pilot program, and then Hypertunis, which will be the individual mobility program of the European Commission. Hypertunis at the moment is not open. Hopefully next year it will be open. I'm still also waiting for confirmation on this. It is in the plans, and there will be quite a lot of budget reserved for this as well. And so what that means for an individual artist or for an individual cultural practitioner, let's say it like that, is that you can apply for funding as if you were going on an Erasmus exchange. So if you want to go for a certain amount of time to another country within the EU, or one of the other participating countries, it could be funded, your travel ticket, your accommodation, and maybe a daily rate for feeding yourself, etc. So yeah, I don't have much more information now. But this is kind of the critique that the European Commission always has had, and Creative Europe always has had, that it's not really open for individual artists. So that's why this, I think it will be more of a priority in the coming 7 years to have this program up and running. That's one way, and through Archipel as well. Those are two ways of involving yourself as an individual artist. But also, I think it's good to kind of look at the opportunities that are there within the other strands. So you might, as an individual, you're technically allowed to apply for cooperation funding, but I think in practice it never happened, and I wouldn't encourage it either. But often there are cooperation projects that are focused on helping individual artists, the mobility of individual artists. Programs like the network sometimes are open for membership of individual artists. Platforms focus on the careers of international or of individual artists. So there are ways. Maybe it's good for you to kind of like see within your field which are the EU-funded projects, and maybe they are looking for talent to boost. So you wouldn't have to apply yourself as an individual artist.
Thank you. Another question, or this is more of a comment. One of the reasons why Caribbean-based artists and individuals lack or are not well represented is the lack of technical proposal writing. So maybe this is something that from DutchCulture we can collaborate in the future to see how can we assist, because I think it's if I speak a little bit from experience myself. Once you get the hang of it, you understand what it's been looking for, especially also when you're from an OCT, you tend to look at things differently. So and you tend to perceive connections differently as well.
So we do organize more in-depth webinars, usually for the cooperation projects, and together with our partners in the Caribbean, we have seen more interest actually from the Caribbean in these workshops as well. They're not necessarily overall technical proposal writing workshop, but it gives a bit of more of an in-depth insight into how to write an application. It is a big, and then of course, when you decide to write an application, we also have one-on-one talks with applicants that are working on an application to see. We also check the application sometimes if we have time to see how they can be a bit sharper. So if you do have an idea, do contact us, and we can see how to bring it to the next level. But as I said, writing a Creative Europe proposal is a lot of work. So if you are not already maybe a bit more established as an organization, it is actually quite a drain on the energy and manpower of an organization. So another strategy might be to not write an application as a project leader, but to first start as a partner in a cooperation project. And so, as I said, these projects have need at least 3 partners from 3 different countries, and it's usually one organization that is the main applicant. But the other partners get funding as well from. So if you don't have maybe the skills of writing an application, we see that happening right now in applications a lot, that there is one maybe a bit more established organization that is responsible for writing the applications, and then the other organizations partner up as part of the program, but are maybe not focusing so much on writing a technically great application.
Thank you. I'm getting a text message here. Someone may be a little bit shy to ask a question in the group. The pilot projects Hypertunis, Music Moves, Performance Europe, and New European Bauhaus, are they also inclusive of the OCTs?
Yes. I'm thinking Hypertunis, definitely. Music Moves Europe, we've seen our first application that we are aware of from the Caribbean within Music Moves Europe, so it's open. They unfortunately didn't get funded. Perform Europe, I'm not sure, but I think it is also open for the OCTs, and I would say for the New European Bauhaus as well. The New European Bauhaus has just started, so I don't have so much information on it right now, but I think it should be open for the OCTs as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the next question, let me see if I didn't skip. Question was answered. Thank you, Monique. Okay, Arthur, looking at the fact that writing is the biggest issue, are there any type of consultant firms you're aware of that can assist?
Yes. So I'm not sure if I would always advise to hire a consultant firm, especially if it's quite a small, relatively small amount that you're applying to. It might be quite costly to hire a consultancy firm. I can't give you any tips, so you would have to find them yourself. But there are firms that are working to write applications and to support writing of applications.
Thank you, Albert.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the opportunities are there. We need to organize ourselves a little bit better. I would advise to look into collaboration amongst the artists in Curacao, maybe the associations that are already present that can propose, I don't want to say larger scale, but more pronounced projects where you can include different individuals, so that maybe if you have to hire a consultant, you know, it can be made possible. Yeah.
Well, and I also want to stress that it might not be we haven't seen so many applications coming from the Caribbean. That might also just be because the Caribbean isn't necessarily focused so much on Europe. I think the conversations I've had are also a lot about how do I cooperate with America or South America, which is not what Creative Europe is about. So it's not only saying that the know-how isn't there. It might also be that maybe the priorities are different on the islands.
Wonderful, wonderful. We have 14 more minutes, so 13. They just turned into 13. So please ask your question.
I think just Guido has some difficulties, but we can go.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, I'm still here. I think indeed I was shut out for a second.
Okay, so my question was, with you having experience from both the policy side and as a musician yourself, what advice can you give our creatives here on the island of Curacao?
In which regard?
With regards to getting European funding, what are like things that need to become standard procedure of your enterprise to be able to transform into this entity that qualifies?
Well, I think if you look at EU funding for culture specifically, it is indeed not so open to individual artists, but it's also because culture is seen as or is part of the national domain. So for maybe up and coming artists, let's say in the music sector, the first point of contact would not necessarily be Europe, but would be something like the Dutch Performing Arts, Fonds Podiumkunsten. The first advice would be to really check if Europe is the way to go. If it is, and if you are an artist working on your internationalization, then my advice would be to check what is already out there. So a festival like Eurosonic is quite important for the internationalization of careers of young musicians in the pop sector. Then one of those I mentioned is youth orchestras. If you're a classical musician, you might find some opportunities there as well.
Thank you. In the meantime, I got another question from Monique. How do you find organizations for your project? Is there a public list where they can refer themselves to, or is it really based on individual research that you can connect?
What we see in practice is that the best applications are written by organizations that already work together for a while. But of course, that work has to kind of start somewhere. So we see in practice that these European networks that were funded that I mentioned, those are actually quite good places to start if you are looking for other organizations, if you don't have a big international network. So what is technically considered a valid organization to apply? There are not a whole lot of prerequisites to apply, actually. Many organizations would qualify technically as a good partner, but it's really about what you want to do with your international projects and to find other organizations that want to do the same. So one other way that we try to help in that regard is sometimes we organize matchmaking sessions online. We've been experimenting with it a little bit, but because the program is so broad, it has some difficulties as well. But then sometimes also within the Creative Europe desks. So each country that participates in the program has a Creative Europe desk that gives advice, it gives information. So that's what we do. But we also have contact between the desks. So if there is an organization that is looking maybe for, let's say, a music project in Lithuania on sustainability, I could contact my colleague in Lithuania to ask if there is such an organization. So also through us, there are some possibilities.
I guess the message is clear. Let's connect, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I've been repeating it a lot because it is a European program. It might sometimes be a little bit vague. Like what type of projects are they looking for? What are the ways we can connect? So really, feel free to message me. I might say that doesn't fit, or I don't know anybody, or I might not have great news for you. But it's always good to check with us if you have an idea.
All right. We're getting a comment here from Kenneth Houghton. Digitizing cultural historical events will be something that could be implemented with other countries. Yes, I think and qualify for funding. If there are no further questions, I'm going to give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I would like to thank everyone for having been present here today. It has been my pleasure to serve as your moderator. Thank you, Albert, for informing us. Thank you to the EU desk here at the Ministry of Economic Development. And thank you. And let's wish that everyone is now far more equipped to qualify for EU funding, and let's celebrate it once it happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guido.
Have a great remainder of your day.
You too. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.